Sarah was a skilled pilot, but the passenger refused to let her fly. "Get her out of the cockpit," he demanded. So she sat in the cabin, helpless. Then, seconds after takeoff, the captain collapsed. Now, only Sarah could save everyone on board, if she could reach the controls in time. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Mitchell had always loved airplanes. Ever since she was a little girl, she would stand in her backyard and watch the planes fly overhead. She would dream about being up there in the clouds, flying high above the world. When she was 8 years old, her father took her to the airport. They sat near the big windows and watched the planes take off and land. Sarah pressed her nose against the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. "Dad, I want to fly planes when I grow up," she said. Her father smiled. "That's a wonderful dream, sweetheart. You can be anything you want to be." Sarah never forgot those words. She worked hard in school, especially in math and science. She read every book about flying she could find. She learned about how planes work, about weather patterns, and about navigation. When she turned 16, she started taking flying lessons. Her instructor was an old pilot named Captain Reynolds. He was tough but fair. He taught her everything he knew. "Flying isn't just about controlling the plane," he would say. "It's about staying calm when things go wrong. The best pilots are the ones who can think clearly in an emergency." Sarah was a natural. She loved every moment in the air. The feeling of the controls in her hands, the sound of the engine, the way the ground fell away beneath her, it all felt right. By the time she was 25, Sarah had her commercial pilot license. She had logged hundreds of hours in the air. She had flown in good weather and bad. She had practiced emergency procedures until they were second nature. But there was one problem. Every airline she applied to turned her down. "We're looking for candidates with more experience," they would say. Or, "We'll keep your application on file." It was always the same story. Sarah knew the real reason. The aviation industry was still dominated by men. Female pilots were rare, and many people didn't take them seriously. But Sarah didn't give up. She kept flying, kept building her hours, kept applying. She believed that one day, someone would give her a chance. 3 years later, Sarah was working as a flight instructor at a small airport. She loved teaching others to fly, but she still dreamed of piloting commercial jets. One day, she received a phone call that would change her life. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" the voice on the phone asked. "Yes, speaking. My name is David Chen. I'm the operations manager for Pacific Air Charter. We provide private charter flights for business clients. One of our pilots just quit, and we need someone immediately. Your former instructor, Captain Reynolds, recommended you. Are you interested?" Sarah's heart leaped. "Yes. Absolutely. Great. Can you come in for an interview tomorrow morning?" The next day, Sarah arrived at Pacific Air Charter's office. It was a small company with only 4 planes. David Chen was a friendly man in his 40s with a warm smile. "Captain Reynolds speaks very highly of you," he said. "He says you're one of the best pilots he's ever trained." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with pride. "He's a great teacher. Tell me about your experience." Sarah talked about her training, her hours in the air, and her passion for flying. David listened carefully, nodding along. "I'll be honest with you, Sarah," he said. "Some of our clients might be surprised to see a female pilot. Are you okay with that?" Sarah had heard this before. "I understand. But once we're in the air, they'll see that I know what I'm doing." David smiled. "That's the attitude I like to hear. The job is yours if you want it. You'll start as a co-pilot, working with our senior pilots. If everything goes well, you'll be a captain within a year." Sarah couldn't believe it. Finally, someone was giving her a chance. "I won't let you down," she promised. "I know you won't," David said. Sarah's first week at Pacific Air Charter was exciting but challenging. She flew as a co-pilot with different senior pilots, learning the company's procedures and getting to know their planes. Most of the senior pilots were professional and respectful. They treated her like any other co-pilot. But a few made it clear they didn't think she belonged there. One pilot, Captain Miller, barely spoke to her during their flights together. He would give her orders but never explained anything. It was as if he hoped she would make a mistake and quit. But Sarah was determined to prove herself. She arrived early for every flight, checked everything twice, and never complained. Slowly, she began to win over even the skeptical pilots. The passengers were a different story. Sarah noticed that some would look surprised when they saw her in the cockpit. A few would even ask if there was a real pilot flying the plane. One businessman once said to her, "You look a bit young to be flying this plane, sweetheart." Sarah smiled politely. "I'm 28, sir, and I have over 2,000 hours of flight experience." "You're in good hands." Most passengers were fine once the flight went smoothly. They would even compliment her landing or thank her for a comfortable ride. After 3 months, David called Sarah into his office. "You're doing great work, Sarah," he said. "The other pilots have nothing but good things to say about you." "Well, almost all of them," he added with a knowing smile. Sarah laughed. "Let me guess, Captain Miller. Don't worry about him. He's like that with everyone at first. You've proven yourself." "Thank you, sir. I have a new assignment for you. We have a client who needs a flight from Los Angeles to Seattle tomorrow morning. It's usually Captain Wilson's route, but he's sick. I need someone reliable to take over. Are you up for it?" "Absolutely," Sarah said without hesitation. "Good. But here's the thing, Captain Harris will be your co-pilot for this flight." Sarah knew Captain Harris. He was the most experienced pilot at Pacific Air Charter, with over 20 years of flying experience. He was in his late 50s and had flown everything from small private planes to large commercial jets. "I'm honored to fly with Captain Harris," Sarah said. "Just one more thing," David added. "This particular client is, let's say, old-fashioned. He specifically requested that an experienced pilot fly him. I told him we're sending our best team. Captain Harris will be listed as the pilot in command on the paperwork, but you'll be handling most of the flying. Is that okay?" Sarah understood. It was a compromise. "That's fine. I just want to fly. I knew you'd understand. Have a good flight tomorrow." Sarah arrived at the airport at 6 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She loved this time of day. The airport was quiet, and she could take her time preparing for the flight. She went through her pre-flight checklist carefully. She checked the weather report, clear skies all the way to Seattle. She reviewed the flight plan and calculated the fuel needed. Everything looked perfect. Captain Harris arrived 30 minutes later. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. Despite his experience, he was never arrogant or condescending. "Good morning, Sarah," he said warmly. "Ready for our flight?" "Good morning, Captain." "Yes, sir. Everything's checked and ready to go. I heard David asked you to take the lead on this one." "That's great. I'll just be here to enjoy the ride and help if needed." Sarah appreciated his attitude. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your trust. You've earned it. I've flown with you twice now, and I can see you know your stuff. My only job today is to make sure our passenger feels comfortable." They walked together to the plane, a beautiful twin-engine jet that could seat 8 passengers. Sarah ran her hand along its smooth surface. She never got tired of this feeling, the anticipation before a flight. The passenger arrived at 7 o'clock. His name was Robert Thornton, a wealthy businessman in his 60s. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He looked like someone used to being in control. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Captain Harris," Captain Harris said, shaking his hand. "This is First Officer Mitchell. We'll be taking you to Seattle this morning." Mr. Thornton barely glanced at Sarah. "Captain, I assume you'll be flying us today?" "We'll both be in the cockpit, sir. Rest assured, we're both highly qualified." Mr. Thornton didn't look convinced, but he nodded and boarded the plane. Once he was settled in the cabin, Captain Harris and Sarah entered the cockpit. Sarah took the left seat, the captain's seat, while Captain Harris sat on the right. "Don't let him get to you," Captain Harris said quietly. "Just focus on flying. That's all that matters." "Yes, sir." Sarah put on her headset and began the startup procedures. She contacted the control tower and received clearance to taxi. Everything was going smoothly. As she guided the plane toward the runway, Captain Harris suddenly put his hand to his head. "You okay, Captain?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, just a little headache. Nothing serious. I've had it since this morning. Probably didn't drink enough water yesterday. Do you need anything?" "We have water here. I'll be fine. Let's just get in the air." Sarah was concerned but didn't push. Pilots were tough, they rarely admitted when something was wrong. They reached the runway and went through the final checks. Sarah contacted the tower again. "Pacific Air Charter 247, you're cleared for takeoff, runway 24. "Cleared for takeoff, runway 24, Pacific Air Charter 247, Sarah confirmed. She looked over at Captain Harris. He was pale and sweating slightly, but he gave her a nod. "Let's go," he said. Sarah pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to accelerate down the runway. The plane picked up speed quickly. 30 knots, 40 knots, 50 knots. The runway markers rushed past in a blur. "V1, Sarah called out, indicating they were now committed to takeoff. "Rotate," Captain Harris said, his voice strained. Sarah pulled back gently on the yoke, and the nose of the plane lifted into the air. The ground fell away beneath them. They were flying. "Gear up," she said. Captain Harris reached for the landing gear lever, but his hand fumbled. He blinked hard, as if trying to clear his vision. "Captain?" Sarah asked, concerned. I don't feel well," he mumbled. His face had gone from pale to ashen. "Captain Harris." Suddenly, Captain Harris slumped forward in his seat. His hands fell away from the controls. He was unconscious. For a split second, Sarah's heart stopped. They were only 300 feet in the air, climbing steeply. The plane was heavy with fuel. One wrong move could be catastrophic. But then her training kicked in. She heard Captain Reynolds' voice in her head, "Stay calm. Think clearly. You know what to do." "Tower, Pacific Air Charter 247, declaring an emergency," she said into her radio, keeping her voice steady. "My captain has lost consciousness. Requesting immediate return to airport." "Pacific Air Charter 247, understood. You're cleared for immediate landing, any runway. Emergency services are being notified." Sarah's mind raced. She needed to secure Captain Harris, continue the climb to a safe altitude, and prepare to land. All while flying the plane alone. First, she leveled the plane at 1,000 feet, high enough to be safe, but not so high that it would take long to come back down. "Mr. Thornton," she called into the intercom. "I need you to come to the cockpit immediately." She heard movement in the cabin behind her. Seconds later, Mr. Thornton appeared at the cockpit door, his face confused. "What's going on? Why are we turning back? Captain Harris is unconscious. I need your help." Can you hold him back in his seat so he doesn't fall forward onto the controls? Mr. Thornton's eyes widened in shock. You mean, you're flying the plane alone? Yes, sir. And I need you to help me right now. Please, just hold him back. For a moment, Mr. Thornton didn't move. He stared at Sarah, then at the unconscious captain, then at all the instruments and controls in the cockpit. The reality of the situation was sinking in. I don't know anything about planes, he stammered. You don't need to. Just hold him steady. Can you do that? Something in Sarah's calm, authoritative voice seemed to snap him out of his shock. He nodded and stepped into the cramped cockpit. Like this? He asked, bracing Captain Harris back into his seat. Perfect. Thank you. Now I need you to stay calm and let me work. Sarah began preparing for the landing. She had to work quickly but carefully. She reduced power and started a gentle turn back toward the airport. Pacific Air Charter 247, what's your status? The tower asked. Captain is still unconscious but stable. Passenger is assisting. I'm setting up for landing on runway 24. Understood. Emergency vehicles are standing by. You're doing great. Take your time. But Sarah knew she couldn't take too much time. Every second in the air was a risk. She needed to get the plane back on the ground safely. Sarah ran through her mental checklist. She had practiced emergency landings hundreds of times in simulators and training flights. But this was real. There was no instructor beside her to take over if she made a mistake. She calculated the approach speed and descent rate in her head. The plane was heavier than usual because they hadn't burned much fuel yet. That meant she would need more runway to stop. Mr. Thornton, I need you to listen carefully, she said. When we land, I want you to stay in your seat with your seatbelt fastened. Don't try to move Captain Harris. The emergency responders will take care of him. Understood? Yes, Mr. Thornton said. His voice was shaky, but he was holding it together. Good. Now I need you to go back to the cabin and buckle yourself in. We'll be landing in about 5 minutes. Are you sure you can do this? He asked. I mean, you're so young, and you're alone, and... Mr. Thornton, Sarah interrupted firmly. I am a licensed commercial pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight experience. I have practiced this exact scenario many times. I can do this. But I need you to trust me and follow my instructions. He looked into her eyes and saw something there, confidence, competence, and complete focus. He nodded slowly. Okay. I trust you. Thank you. Now go buckle in. This is going to be fine. As Mr. Thornton left the cockpit, Sarah allowed herself one deep breath. Then she pushed all her fear and anxiety aside. There was no room for emotion now. Only training and skill mattered. She contacted the tower again. Pacific Air Charter 247, beginning final approach. Cleared to land, runway 24. Wind calm. Visibility 10 miles. Perfect conditions, Sarah thought. At least something was going right. She lined up the plane with the runway. It was straight ahead, a long strip of concrete that suddenly seemed very narrow. She had landed on this runway dozens of times before, but never like this. She lowered the landing gear. The familiar thunk of the gear locking into place was reassuring. One more step completed. She extended the flaps to slow the plane down. The airspeed decreased steadily. She adjusted her descent rate, keeping the plane on the perfect glide path. 500 feet, she said aloud to herself. Airspeed good. Descent rate good. She could see the runway clearly now. Emergency vehicles were lined up on the side, fire trucks, ambulances, all with their lights flashing. It was both comforting and nerve-wracking to see them there. 200 feet. The plane was descending smoothly. Sarah made tiny adjustments to the controls, responding to every small gust of wind, every slight change in the plane's attitude. 100 feet. The runway was rushing up to meet her. This was the critical moment. She needed to time the flare perfectly, pull back too soon and the plane would stall, too late and they would hit the ground hard. 50 feet. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision. She pulled back gently on the yoke, reducing power at the same time. The plane's nose came up slightly. The back wheels touched the runway with a slight bump. Then the front wheel came down. They were on the ground. Sarah immediately pulled the throttles back to idle and deployed the speed brakes. The plane began to slow. She pressed gently on the brakes, not too hard, she didn't want to skid or blow a tire. The plane slowed steadily. The emergency vehicles were keeping pace with them on the side of the runway. Sarah guided the plane to a smooth stop. Pacific Air Charter 247 is safely on the ground, she reported to the tower. Her voice was still calm, but she could feel her hands starting to shake now that the danger had passed. Excellent work, 247. Paramedics are approaching now. Sarah shut down the engines and set the parking brake. Only then did she allow herself to close her eyes for a moment. She had done it. Everyone was safe. There was a knock on the cockpit door. Sarah opened it to find two paramedics waiting. "We need to check on your captain," one of them said. "Of course. Please help him." The paramedics quickly assessed Captain Harris. He was breathing normally, and his pulse was strong. They carefully moved him out of the cockpit and onto a stretcher. "Looks like a severe case of dehydration and heat exhaustion," one paramedic said. "We'll take him to the hospital, but he should be fine." Sarah felt a wave of relief. Captain Harris would be okay. Another paramedic looked at Sarah. "Are you all right, miss? That must have been terrifying." "I'm fine," Sarah said. "Just doing my job." As the paramedics wheeled Captain Harris away, Sarah saw Mr. Thornton standing near the plane. He looked shocked, as if he still couldn't believe what had just happened. "Mr. Thornton," Sarah said, approaching him. "Are you okay?" He looked at her with a new expression, one of respect and admiration. "Am I okay? You just saved our lives. You landed this plane all by yourself." "I didn't think. I thought." "You thought I couldn't do it because I'm young and female," Sarah said, not unkindly. Mr. Thornton had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry. I was wrong about you. Very wrong. You're an incredible pilot." "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad everyone is safe." The next few hours were a blur. Sarah had to fill out incident reports, talk to investigators, and answer countless questions about what had happened. She explained everything calmly and clearly, just as she had handled the emergency itself. David Chen arrived at the airport, looking worried. When he saw Sarah, relief flooded his face. "Sarah. Thank God you're okay. I heard what happened. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, David. Captain Harris is at the hospital, but the paramedics said he'll be okay." "I can't believe you landed that plane all by yourself. That was incredible." Sarah shrugged modestly. "It's what any pilot would do. I just did what I was trained to do." "No," David said firmly. "Not any pilot. You stayed calm under pressure. You made all the right decisions. You saved 3 lives today, your own, Captain Harris's, and Mr. Thornton's." "I was just doing my job." David smiled. "Well, you did it perfectly. I'm proud of you, Sarah." The news of Sarah's emergency landing spread quickly. By that evening, local news stations were reporting the story. The headlines read, "Young female pilot saves lives in emergency landing" and "Heroic first officer lands plane after captain collapses." Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters wanting interviews. She declined most of them, not comfortable with the attention. But one call she couldn't ignore came from Mr. Thornton himself. "Sarah, I needed to call you personally," he said. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you this morning. I judged you based on your age and gender, not your skills. That was wrong. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Thornton. I also wanted you to know that I've already called Pacific Air Charter. I told them that from now on, whenever I need to fly, I want you as my pilot. And I'm recommending you to all my business associates." Sarah was touched. "That's very kind of you. It's not kindness, it's common sense. You're an excellent pilot, and I trust you with my life. I proved that today when I let you land that plane." After she hung up, Sarah sat quietly for a moment. Just that morning, Mr. Thornton had barely acknowledged her existence. Now he was telling everyone she was the best pilot he'd ever flown with. The incident had changed something. Not just for Mr. Thornton, but potentially for many others who heard the story. The following week, Sarah visited Captain Harris in the hospital. He was recovering well from his dehydration and exhaustion. The doctors said he had been working too much without taking care of himself properly. "Sarah," he greeted her warmly from his hospital bed. Come in, come in. I've been wanting to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For saving my life. The doctors told me what happened. If you hadn't landed that plane safely, who knows what could have happened to all of us." Sarah sat down beside his bed. "I'm just glad you're okay, Captain. I heard you handled everything perfectly. The investigators said they've never seen such a textbook perfect emergency landing, especially from someone so young and relatively inexperienced." "I had a great teacher," Sarah said, thinking of Captain Reynolds. "I also heard something else," Captain Harris said with a twinkle in his eye. "David told me he's promoting you to captain. You'll have your own flights now." Sarah's eyes widened. "Really? He didn't tell me that. He wanted it to be a surprise. But I couldn't wait to congratulate you. You've earned it, Sarah. That emergency proved that you have what it takes to be a captain, not just the skills, but the judgment and the calm under pressure." "Thank you, Captain Harris. That means a lot coming from you. There's something else you should know," he added. "Your story has gone viral. People all over the country are talking about you. You've become an inspiration, especially to young women who dream of becoming pilots." Sarah wasn't sure how to feel about that. She didn't want to be famous, she just wanted to fly. But as the days passed, she began to receive emails and letters from young girls and women. They told her how her story had inspired them to pursue their own dreams, whether in aviation or other fields. One letter particularly touched her. It was from a 14-year-old girl named Emma who wrote, "Dear Captain Mitchell, I saw your story on the news. I've always wanted to be a pilot, but my teacher told me that girls aren't good at math and science. After hearing about what you did, I realized that my teacher was wrong. If you can land a plane all by yourself in an emergency, then I can definitely learn math and become a pilot too. Thank you for showing me that girls can do anything." Sarah kept that letter on her desk. It reminded her why her work mattered, not just for herself, but for all the young women who would come after her. 3 months after the emergency landing, Sarah stood in David Chen's office, wearing the 4 stripes of a captain on her uniform for the first time. "How does it feel?" David asked. "It feels right," Sarah said with a smile. "You've come a long way since you started here. I knew you had potential, but you've exceeded even my highest expectations. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. I just opened the door. You did all the hard work yourself." Sarah's first flight as captain was scheduled for that afternoon. She would be flying a family of 4 to San Francisco. As she prepared for the flight, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. When the passengers arrived, they were a friendly couple with 2 children, a boy about 10 years old and a girl about 8. The little girl's eyes grew wide when she saw Sarah in her captain's uniform. "Mommy, look! The pilot is a lady," she exclaimed. The mother smiled apologetically at Sarah. "I'm sorry, she's just surprised. She's never seen a female pilot before." "That's okay," Sarah said, kneeling down to the little girl's level. "What's your name?" "Emma," the girl said shyly. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the same name as the girl who had written her that letter. "Well, Emma, would you like to see the cockpit before we take off?" Emma's face lit up. "Really? Can I?" With her parents' permission, Sarah took Emma into the cockpit. The little girl looked around in wonder at all the instruments and controls. "Do you know what all these buttons do?" Emma asked. "Most of them," Sarah said with a laugh. "It takes a lot of studying to learn." "Were you always allowed to be a pilot?" Sarah thought about how to answer that. Women have always been allowed to be pilots. But sometimes people don't think we can do it as well as men. So we have to work extra hard to prove ourselves. "That's not fair," Emma said with a child's simple wisdom. "No, it's not," Sarah agreed. "But the good news is that things are getting better. More and more women are becoming pilots now. Maybe one day, when you're older, you could be a pilot too." Emma's eyes sparkled. "Really? You think I could?" "I know you could. If you work hard, study hard, and never give up on your dreams, you can do anything you want." After Emma and her family were settled in the cabin, Sarah returned to the cockpit. Her co-pilot today was a young man fresh out of flight school, eager and nervous. "Ready for your first flight as a commercial pilot?" Sarah asked him. "Yes, Captain," he said. "I promise I'll do my best." "I know you will. And if anything goes wrong, just stay calm and remember your training. That's the most important thing." As Sarah went through her pre-flight checklist, she thought about how far she had come. Just a few years ago, she had been the nervous new pilot, desperate for someone to give her a chance. Now she was a captain, mentoring the next generation of pilots. And somewhere in the cabin behind her was a little girl named Emma who now knew that she could dream of flying planes too. Sarah guided the plane onto the runway and received clearance for takeoff. As she pushed the throttles forward and felt the plane accelerate, she smiled. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The aviation industry began to change, slowly but surely. Sarah's story had sparked conversations about diversity in the cockpit. Airlines started actively recruiting more female pilots. Flight schools reported an increase in young women enrolling in their programs. Sarah herself had become something of an ambassador for women in aviation. She gave talks at high schools and colleges, encouraging young people, especially young women, to consider careers in flying. At one such event, a college student raised her hand. "Captain Mitchell, weren't you scared when the other pilot passed out? How did you stay so calm?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Of course I was scared. But fear is natural. The key is not to let fear control you. I had a choice in that moment. I could panic, or I could trust in my training and abilities. I chose to trust myself." "But how do you build that kind of confidence?" another student asked. "By preparing yourself thoroughly. By practicing until everything becomes second nature. And by refusing to let anyone convince you that you can't do something. When people told me I couldn't be a pilot because I was a woman, I didn't argue with them. I just proved them wrong." After the talk, several young women came up to thank her personally. Many had stories of being discouraged from pursuing careers in male-dominated fields. Sarah's story gave them courage to persist. One young woman, a sophomore studying aerospace engineering, told Sarah, "My advisor suggested I switch to a different major because he said engineering was too difficult for girls. After hearing your story, I decided to prove him wrong. I'm getting straight A's now." Sarah felt a surge of pride. This was why her experience mattered. Not just because she had successfully handled an emergency, but because her success opened doors for others. 1 year after the emergency landing, Sarah received an unusual request. Captain Reynolds, her old flight instructor, wanted to hire Pacific Air Charter for a special flight. When Sarah called him to discuss the details, he had a surprise for her. "I'm retiring, Sarah," he said. "After 40 years of flying, it's time to hang up my wings. But before I do, I want to take one last flight. And I want you to be the captain." Sarah was honored. "Where would you like to go?" "Nowhere in particular. Just take me up for an hour or so. Let me enjoy the sky one last time with one of my best students at the controls." On the day of the flight, Sarah arrived early to prepare the plane. This wasn't just any flight, it was a tribute to the man who had taught her everything. Captain Reynolds arrived with his wife, a kind woman who had been married to him for 35 years. "She's put up with me talking about flying for all these years," Captain Reynolds said with a laugh. "I figured she deserved to see what all the fuss was about." Sarah took them to the plane and helped them get settled in the cabin. Then she went through her pre-flight checks with extra care. Everything had to be perfect. As they took off, Sarah felt a sense of peace. The weather was beautiful, clear blue skies with just a few white clouds. Perfect flying weather. She climbed to 5,000 feet and leveled off. Then she engaged the autopilot and went back to talk to her passengers. "How's the view?" she asked. Captain Reynolds' wife was pressed against the window, marveling at the landscape below. "It's beautiful. I had no idea it would be like this." Captain Reynolds smiled at Sarah. "You've done well for yourself, Sarah. I always knew you would. I couldn't have done it without you, Captain. You taught me everything. I taught you the mechanics of flying. But that day when the captain passed out, you showed something I couldn't teach, courage and judgment under pressure. That came from within you." They flew over mountains and valleys, following the coastline for a while before turning inland. Captain Reynolds pointed out landmarks and told stories from his 40 years of flying. As they began their descent back to the airport, Captain Reynolds said, "You know, Sarah, when I started flying, there were almost no women in the cockpit. I remember thinking that was a shame. Flying is too wonderful an experience to exclude half the population." "Did people give you a hard time for teaching female students?" Sarah asked. "Some did. They said I was wasting my time, that women would never make good pilots. But I knew they were wrong. Some of my best students have been women. You're proof of that." Sarah landed the plane smoothly and taxied back to the hangar. As Captain Reynolds and his wife prepared to leave, he shook Sarah's hand. "Thank you for a beautiful flight, Captain Mitchell. Thank you for everything, Captain Reynolds. You changed my life." "No, Sarah. You changed your own life. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." 5 years after the emergency landing, Sarah sat in her office at Pacific Air Charter. She was now not just a captain, but also the company's chief pilot, responsible for training and mentoring new pilots. The industry had continued to change. More women were flying than ever before. While they were still a minority, they were no longer a rarity. Sarah had trained dozens of pilots, both men and women. She always told them the same thing: flying is about skill, judgment, and dedication. It has nothing to do with gender, race, or background. If you're willing to work hard and never give up, you can succeed. On her wall hung several photos. One showed her with Captain Reynolds at his retirement flight. Another showed her receiving an award from the Aviation Safety Foundation for her emergency landing. A third showed her speaking at a Women in Aviation conference. But her favorite photo was a more recent one. It showed Sarah standing beside a young woman in a pilot's uniform, Emma, the 8-year-old girl who had visited her cockpit 5 years ago. Emma was now 13 and had just completed her first flying lesson. She had written Sarah to tell her the news and to thank her for the inspiration. "I'm going to be a pilot like you," Emma had written. And when people tell me I can't do it, I'm going to remember your story and prove them wrong. Sarah smiled as she read the letter again. This was her real legacy, not just what she had accomplished herself, but how she had inspired others to reach for their dreams. There was a knock on her door. A young woman entered, a new pilot trainee starting her first day at Pacific Air Charter. Captain Mitchell. I'm Jessica. I'm your new trainee. I just wanted to introduce myself before our first flight together tomorrow. Sarah stood and shook her hand. Welcome aboard, Jessica. Do you know why you want to be a pilot? Jessica smiled. Actually, yes. 5 years ago, I read a news story about a young female pilot who saved everyone on her plane when the captain passed out. That story inspired me to pursue flying. I've been working toward this goal ever since. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Well then, Jessica, I'm honored to be your instructor. Let's make sure you become the best pilot you can be. Thank you, Captain. I won't let you down. After Jessica left, Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the runway. A plane was taking off, climbing steadily into the afternoon sky. She watched until it disappeared into the clouds. She thought about that day 5 years ago when everything had changed. The day when fear could have won, but courage prevailed. The day when she proved to herself, and to others, that she belonged in the cockpit. Sarah had learned something important that day. It wasn't about being a female pilot or a young pilot. It was about being a good pilot. It was about having the skills, the judgment, and the courage to do what needed to be done. And now, because of her perseverance, others wouldn't face the same barriers. The young women who came after her would have an easier path. They would have role models. They would know it was possible. Sarah picked up her phone and looked at a message that had come in that morning. It was from Emma, the 13-year-old who had just completed her first flying lesson. Captain Sarah, I flew today. It was the most amazing feeling in the world. Thank you for showing me this was possible. One day, I'll be a captain just like you. Sarah smiled and typed back, I have no doubt you will, Emma. The sky is waiting for you. She put down her phone and returned to her desk. Tomorrow she would begin training Jessica. Her calendar was full, her days were busy, but Sarah had never been happier. The little girl who had once stood in her backyard watching planes fly overhead had grown into the captain she always wanted to be. Captain Sarah Mitchell had become exactly what she had always dreamed of being, a pilot, a leader, and an inspiration to all who dared to dream big and work hard to make those dreams come true.